When I have a look at this world map and I think about all the places around the world we've explored, most of them have been really hot and sunburn was my #1 problem. That, however, is all about to change. This vehicle was designed and I've been building it out to tackle much colder parts of the planet. While we do that, I want us to be warm and cozy. So today, I'm going to show you how to install a diesel heater from the very beginning to the very finish. So the wiring, the plumbing, where to actually physically mount it, all of that, I'll show you how it goes as I go through the steps myself. I've never installed one before. If I can figure it out, you can too. So I'm Dan, this is The Road Chose Me. Let's go for it. Installation of an Espar diesel heater. To kick things off, I'll start with what is probably the hardest and most involved part of this project, depending on your vehicle, and that is getting diesel out of the actual tank. And there's a few different ways you can go about this. If you're lucky, your vehicle will have an auxiliary pickup already ready to go. Sprinter vans are famous for this. I guess Mercedes thought ahead, and you can just tee into the hose that's already sitting there for this purpose, and that's how you get diesel out of the tank. Super straightforward, probably takes about 10 minutes. The next option is that you could tee into the return line from your engine. So when a diesel engine takes diesel out of the tank, there is the line from the tank to the engine. There is also a return line where unused diesel goes back into the tank. And in theory, I could tee into that and let the diesel heater take the diesel from that line. Depending on the vehicle and the tank and the whole setup, that should work. But as far as I can tell, no one has installed one of these on an EcoDiesel Wrangler or Gladiator, so I don't actually know what that return line looks like deep down inside the tank. My main question is, does the return line actually go all the way down into the tank? Or does it kind of just end at the top of the tank, which means sucking on that line wouldn't actually get you any diesel anyway? So instead, I'll get diesel out of the tank the third way, and that is drilling a hole in the fuel hanger and inserting a diesel pickup tube that the little diesel pump can suck the diesel out of to feed the heater. And you can see I've cut the tube to length so that it won't actually touch the bottom of the tank. This way the diesel heater won't be able to run my diesel tank dry, and I'll always be able to drive the Jeep, even if the heater runs out of diesel. Now the hanger's back in the tank, and I can install a little bit of diesel hose on the end of that pickup tube. And this is all supplied by Espar. This is the little hose that the diesel heater will suck diesel out of the tank through. In the instructions it says it's really important to push the little plastic hose in as far as it will go into the little joiners. You don't want any air gaps in there. You can see it came up pretty neat and clean, and the little hose route's out of the way, no problem. Next, I need to connect diesel hose to the tiny little diesel pump that feeds the heater. So this little pump just sips diesel out of the tank and feeds it up to the heater at the right rate. So I need to connect a small plastic hose on each end using those same joiners. And again, I want to make sure I push these on as far as they will go. And you can see the whole thing is sitting on a bracket that has a strange angle on it. That's because it's really important that this little pump sits on exactly the right angle. Here we are underneath the Jeep again, and I've just finished installing the small metering pump. And so I'll show you what that looks like now. This is, you can see the diesel line coming out of the Jeep's diesel tank, and it goes directly into that little metering pump. And the metering pump is attached to the Jeep using this bolt here that is holding a couple of the handbrake cables. I'm really happy with that because it means it's up really high. It's above this cross member, so it's not going to get hit on the ground. It's out of harm's way. And because I used Espar's bracket to actually mount it, it's on that really steep angle that it needs to be on. I think it needs to be between 15 and 45 degrees, but double check the instructions. They're pretty strict about the angle that has to be on, so it provides the right amount of diesel to the heater. Coming out the other side of the metering pump, on the other side of the crossmember, there goes the diesel line heading away and over to that far corner where the actual diesel heater will be. And the only other thing that the metering pump needs is its little electrical wires. So it's 2 green wires here, And I've got those in spaghetti tube again, just to protect them. And they run all the way over until they go through a bung and up inside the camper, where I'll connect them up to the main wiring loom. So that's it for underneath now. The metering pump can now get diesel out of the tank and it can push it over towards the heater. We're done underneath. Let's move on to the next step. When it comes to the wiring for this diesel heater, this all looks pretty intimidating, but it's actually fairly straightforward once we eliminate some things that are easy wins and some things that we don't actually need. So first of all, the main big harness that it comes with, it has this huge plug on it that quite obviously just plugs into the heater. That one's really simple, and then we've got all of these connectors off the main harness to deal with. The first one, and the easiest one, is there's a whole bundle of wires here that have 6 individual little wires inside of them. We're not going to use that at all. We can actually cut that off quite short, maybe 6 or 8 inches or something. Make sure when you cut it that none of these wires can touch each other. So I'm going to cut them all at slightly different lengths. Then I'm just going to tape it up with electrical tape and forget about it. I can throw away almost all of that wiring. I don't need it. The next really easy win is over here. We have 2 wires inside a sheath. One is really big red and one is really big black. This is your 12 volt positive and negative. This is what you're going to connect to your battery to actually power the diesel heater, probably your house lithium or whatever you've got. And it comes with a little fuse holder, a 20 amp fuse, and a little pigtail you need so that you can connect it up. The only word of advice there is, make sure this is the last thing you do. You don't want to have 12 volts running through any of this while you're still crimping connectors or cutting wires or anything like that. If you do connect this early on, just take the fuse out of the fuse holder. That way none of it is powered. The very last thing you're going to do is plug that fuse in to test it out. Moving on this harness, there's a few other things we can simply ignore. One, there's a little fuse holder here that just terminates. That's fine, we can just leave that as it is. We don't need to do anything with it. Just tuck it away somewhere, tape it to the harness. There's another connector here. This one says, do not bend here, and it has a terminating plug on it. For whatever reason, communication-wise, they need this to terminate. Just leave it alone. Don't touch it. Tape it up somewhere, put it out of the way. We don't need to think about it. Now we're really getting down to what we need to think about. The easiest of them is this little connector that has 2 green wires. This is the connector that goes to the little diesel pump or the little ticker that sits underneath the vehicle and actually pulls diesel out of the tank and brings it up to the heater. And so the little pump comes with its own wiring harness, also 2 green wires, and it comes with bare wires on one end and the plug that will connect onto here, ready for you to put onto these wires. And they do this so that this isn't bulky and you can pass this through a rubber grommet, or you can, poke it wherever you need to in your vehicle. So after I've run this underneath down to where the little pump will be, come back up inside the vehicle, get the lengths all right, then I'll put this plug on the end and then I can just connect it in there, and that's it. The little diesel pump is connected. And then so the final thing that we need to think about is what's called the EasyStart Pro. And this is the thermostat and the control unit for this diesel heater. And so on this, we'll be able to set the temperature we want to maintain, how many hours we want it to stay on for, all of that kind of stuff. And because this is how we're going to be controlling the diesel heater, we just need to move one terminating plug. So the only other plug that we have here now is this 4-pin one that also has a terminator on it. So we want to disconnect that terminator, just unplug it, and plug it in to the far end of the EasyStart Pro harness, so that now that part of communications is terminated back here. While we're here, we can also plug in the actual EasyStart Pro, which just has this little square connector. It only goes one way around, and that's it, it's connected. We also have this extra little connector here, a little rectangle one. This is for an external thermometer, which we don't need because the EasyStart has one built in. So there's no need to use that. You could tape it up, you could just leave it, it's fine. And then the only other thing to do now is to connect that whole EasyStart Pro harness to the actual main diesel heater harness. And again, Espar have provided this as bare wires ready to be joined in, and they give you the plug and all of the pins that you need. So again, after I've run this in my vehicle, figured out exactly where this will live, run the wiring down behind cabinets and through grommets and wherever, I'll cut this to length and then I'll pin these into this plug so that when I plug it in, all of the 4 colors match with that plug there. And that's it. Although it looks a little daunting, it's actually fine when you lay it all out and you think about it and you do it slowly. So it is definitely something you can do yourself. So when it comes to actually installing the heater in your vehicle, I think it makes a lot more sense to do as much of it as you can out here where you've got room to work, rather than actually bolt it into the vehicle. Then you're gonna have to do most of it upside down from underneath. That doesn't sound like fun at all. So when you buy this thing, Espar give you a mounting plate and kind of a foam pad. And basically the diesel heater bolts to this, and then this bolts into your car. And they have this squishy foam pad, which would go between the plate and your vehicle, and that would take up any of the corrugations or whatever that are in the floor of your van or something like that. This doesn't work for me, so we're gonna put that aside and not use it. Instead, I bought this thing on Amazon. This is actually generic for pretty much any diesel heater in existence. And the reason I bought it is because it has this 1-inch flange on it, which is perfect because I'm mounting it in the floor, and the floor of my composite camper is exactly 1 inch thick. So I'll use this instead. The diesel heater will be bolt here on this side. All of this goes down through the big hole I drilled in the floor, and then all of the bits of the diesel heater will come out the bottom. And this big steel flange will protect the composite floor where I cut that hole, so that the heat from the exhaust or anything like that is not actually touching the composites. This thing was $30 on Amazon. I'll throw a link in the description. So with that, all I need to do now is bolt on as much as I can. The inlet air, the exhaust air, a little bit more of the diesel that goes in. I'm gonna bolt on its little coupling. All of that I'll do here on the bench while I've got lots of light and lots of room to work. Then we'll move inside and actually put it in there. While you watch me assemble this, I'll address the elephant in the room about whether you need to use a quality diesel heater like this Espar, or whether you can just buy a cheap generic knockoff, which there seems to be dozens and dozens of. I did a whole ton of research on this, and I really struggled with the decision. Everything I read said the cheap ones will work perfectly fine for quite a while, and then they won't work. They'll break, they'll gum up, they'll get clogged up. You have to pull them apart, clean them out, put them back together, and hopefully they'll work again. And it really got me thinking about the trips that I go on, the places I go, and the gear that I rely on. And you know, I've never bought a cheap winch, and my worn winches have never let me down. When I needed them in the Congo, when I needed them in Australia, the winches just worked. I didn't have to pull them apart and mess around with them. Same story for the fridges that I've bought in the past, same story for my wheels, my tires, all of that. I like to buy quality items because I need to rely on them, and I need to know that they'll work, and they'll work when I really need them to. You know, if I drive this vehicle up into the Arctic and it's -40, I can't really afford to not have the diesel heater work. So for me, this just came down to that usual story of buy once, buy it right, and never have to think about it again. Because the product is high quality, the product will just work. So could you buy a cheap one and have it work most of the time? Yeah, probably. But if you rely on it and it fails, that's gonna be a bad day. For me, I'm buying quality products so that I can explore the world, and I spend less time messing with gear and more time out there doing the things that I enjoy doing. I'll show you how the heater finished up here at the back of the Jeep. As you can see, there is nothing to be seen from up high. It's not until you actually sit on the ground, you get down here to where the actual heater is installed under the Jeep. And so here you can see how neatly it finished up. This is the air intake line. This is the diesel coming in, and I've wrapped it all in spaghetti tube all the way back. and then this is the exhaust coming out of the diesel heater. And I put this little reflective heat shield here just to protect the composite panel a little bit from the heat of the exhaust. And I also made this small aluminum deflector here. It's under the exhaust here, and then it's on an angle to try and deflect the hot gases that come out of the exhaust, just so they go out and away from the camper. You can see how neat and how tidy it all is. Espar provide these little clamps that I've put in a few spots to clamp the exhaust so it stays where I want it, and the air intake comes over here as well. And so from underneath, that is it. That is all that you see. Pretty neat and tidy. I'm really happy with how that finished up. Moving inside the Jeep now, it's time to think about where I want to mount the controller. And it's important to remember this thing has the thermometer in it as well, and it is the thermostat. So if you put it near the floor, it'll probably read lower than if you put it near the roof. And I really wanted this to be somewhere where I'd be able to get at it when I'm standing at the kitchen bench, when I'm kind of at central, but also it'd be nice if I could reach it while we're lying up in bed. It'd be pretty nice to turn this thing on in the morning when it's cold. So I'm just playing around thinking about how will I stick it to any surface, where will it be reachable, and where will it not be in the way of the bed platform. It's kind of a juggling act, but I need to lock this in so that then I can run all the wiring. Once I had that location set, I ran all the wiring inside and outside the Jeep, and then it's time to crimp on these joiners and pin this plug. And the easiest way to do this is kind of plug the plug in a little way and then just match up all the colors as you push them into the connector. That way you make certain that you get them all correct. And don't forget here, this Deutsch connector needs this little orange thing. It helps separate the pins and keep them all in the perfect alignment so they plug in properly. So after you've inserted the pins from the backside, you push it down, it clips into place, and now it's solidly set in the middle of the plug. And now when I go to plug it in, I get that really satisfying click that lets me know everything has worked properly. So everything's ready to go, but the hot air has no way to get out. I better fix that. I thought about having it come straight out like this, and then I really liked getting it out of the way so it takes up less space inside the cabinet. So this is what I'm going to go with. I probably need to do something about that. I really wanted to make sure I got this hole in the right spot. It's not the kind of thing I'm going to get to do twice. So I spent a long time here transposing exactly where it was going to sit and then thinking about how it would look. It was only at the last minute I realized I did not want it to go below the bottom of the cabinet door, even a tiny fraction, because the floor that I'm going to install would snag on it. So I drilled that hole with the right size hole saw, and then it's time to insert this, which I think will live on the outside. So what I'm going to do is cut this down, this piece that comes from Espar that normally just goes straight on the hose. Then I needed to drill the 3 holes and actually bolt that piece on. Cutting down the hose was pretty easy with a hacksaw, and in fact the hose was more than long enough that I would have had a second chance at this if it didn't work. I clamp it all on, attach the hose, and finally get to see, did I get that big hole in the right spot? I am really happy with how that turned out. I think it looks great, and tucking it out of the way in the corner means it takes up less interior space in the cabinet. So that is it. The install now is complete. The only thing left to do is to actually test it out. And I've just hot wired the diesel heater to the Renogy 100 lithium battery. I haven't sorted out my whole 12 volt setup yet, but let's come over here and have a look at the control for the diesel heater. It seems to go to sleep when it isn't in use, which is pretty good. Obviously it doesn't use any power. And so I turned it on a little bit earlier and I set the language to English and I set it to Celsius because my brain works in Celsius. So if we go through, we can turn the heater on. It just said it was 11 in here. I'm gonna set it to 18 for 30 minutes. And that's it. The little red ring around the circle there means that it has turned on and the diesel heater is now about to start. And so I don't actually know how long this takes. This is something I think it goes through a few self-diagnostic checks. It turns on the fan. It makes sure that everything is safe and everything is good. and then I should hear the little metering pump start taking diesel out of the tank, and then the heater itself will fire up, and we should be able to see how much hot air this thing is going to pump out. So there we go, it's been about a minute and I could hear the pump ticking and starting to pull diesel out. The fan is ramping up and it kind of sounds a little bit like combustion. I've got one of the windows open here, so we're gonna hear a bit of the exhaust for sure. And, oh yeah, the air coming out of the vent is already warm-ish. It isn't cranking hot yet, but I can kind of tell it's all just warming up. It's just getting going. So it seems to take about a minute before it'll start pumping out hot air, but that's perfectly fine. I'm okay with that. Oh yeah, the air coming out now is really starting to warm up. It feels very much like putting your hand in the outlet of a hairdryer. You can really tell the air coming out of there is really dry. It has no humidity, even though it's raining outside right now. And yeah, plenty of hot air pumping out of there. And one nice thing I was just thinking about while looking at this, I currently have it turned down like that. Nothing stops me rotating this around. Now the air is actually coming up on an angle, so the hot air now is like coming out this way. I don't know if I'd prefer to have it coming up or coming down, but there we go. Oh yeah, and then one other thing that I just noticed is that the controller over here, it has gone to sleep again, but you can see the little red ring is still illuminated around the circle. So I guess that's to show you that the actual heater is still turned on, and although the display is off, the heater is actually heating, so you don't get confused about whether it's heating or not. That's pretty nice. So there you go, that was the entire install of the Espar Diesel Heater from start to finish. And as you saw, there are a lot of different steps, but each of them is manageable and you really can do it yourself. I figured it out, so I'm sure you can too. If you do have any questions though, questions about the heater, questions about installing your own, fire away with a question down in the comment. I'm really happy to try and help and answer in any way that I can. My goal is to help you guys get out there on the road and have your own adventures. And so for me, having a diesel heater for us to be cozy and warm when it is well below freezing, I think this is going to be a huge level up. And I need to say a huge thanks to my supporters on Patreon. They make all of this possible. They're getting early access to these videos. They're getting behind the scenes content. They know where we're going to be shipping this thing in a couple of months. I need to drive it into a shipping container, send it to a new part of the world. They've already got info and access to a lot of the stuff I've been working on. That's all coming soon to you guys, but if you want to get the behind the scenes, there's a link down in the description. Jump over to Patreon and have a look over there. We've got a whole community going on, lots of questions and answers and lots of back and forward. So a big thanks to those people over there. And thanks to you as well for watching. I appreciate the support. My channel's growing. I really appreciate it. I cannot wait to show you guys the place that we're going to take this. And I think it's going to be quite spectacular. I'm really looking forward to this one. Until next time though, have fun out there, and maybe I'll bump into you on the road.